There's a lot happening with New Jersey's child welfare system. We want to help you make sense of it and share our story. This is DCF on the Air.
This is DCF on the Air, and I'm Jason Bukowski. DCF on the Air is a production of the New Jersey Department of Children and Families, and each month we'll be discussing elements of a revolution taking place in our system as we move to be in service to New Jersey's residents, helping them to be safe, healthy, and connected. April is recognized nationally as National Child Abuse Prevention Month, and New Jersey DCF is absolutely committed to elevating its work of upstream prevention to avert harm before it can destabilize a family or leave a lasting negative impression on a child. But what do we do when the child has already experienced trauma or adversity? How do we help them to heal or cope, or how do we build up their internal strengths to face adversity in the future? It's within that context that we want to discuss this month's topic, to get a sense of not just how we prevent trauma from happening, but also how do we disrupt and mitigate the long-term impact of trauma in the children we support, and maybe even disrupt some of the cycles of intergenerational trauma that can affect families. In June of 2022, at the height of the initial wave of the pandemic, New Jersey took a big step in advancing work related to adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We launched our Office of Resilience, recognizing that the response has to come not just from the Child Welfare Agency, but through partnerships with our fellow state agencies and even some local community organizations. Joining me today is Dr. Rebecca Bryan, Executive Director of our Office of Resilience. Rebecca is new to DCF, having joined the department at the tail end of 2022 to take over leadership of our Office of Resilience as our first DCF Executive Director. It had previously been led by an executive on loan through a partnership with some of our nonprofit partners in this space. But even though Rebecca may be new to the department, in no way is she new to working with children and families on issues of adversity and resilience. Prior to joining DCF, Rebecca worked as a nurse, primary care nurse practitioner, social justice advocate, researcher, and clinical instructor in the public health arena in Camden, New Jersey. In 2012, she left traditional practice and teaching to start the Urban Promise Wellness Center, which she directed until 2018 and where she continues to volunteer. It was here, while working with youth growing up in systemic poverty and navigating structural racism, that she first learned about the ACEs study and the evolving science of ACEs. More recently, at Rutgers Camden School of Nursing, she served as Director of Community Engagement and Professional Development, where she and her colleagues discovered that the risk factors for wound generation and healing overlap many of the same risk factors generated by ACEs. Rebecca, welcome to DCF on the Air.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great. As we begin today's conversation, I'd like to just take a step back and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about ACEs. I know it seems like we've talked about this a lot as a system, but for our audience members who may not be quite as familiar, what are ACEs and how are they linked to outcomes later in life?
It's a great question and no easy answer. So adverse childhood experiences, which is what ACEs stands for, are things that happen to kids before the age of 18 that leave a lasting mark on them. And the term was coined by the study that you mentioned at the introduction, which is the ACEs study done in 1998. It was a collaboration between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente out in California. And what that study did was it asked adults to look back at their childhoods and answer 10 questions that asked about adversity experienced. And those 10 questions can be looked up easily online. But I think what was unique about it was, yes, it looked at things that you would think about being asked, like sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, but it also looked at household dysfunction. And what they did for each one of those questions to which you said yes, you got a score of 1. And so the highest score you could get would be 10. And your score was called your ACE score. And then they correlated that score with health outcomes in their adulthood. So again, they were asking adults to look back on their childhoods. So, and what they found was amazing. Even though the original study, the population they looked at was 70% white, 70% college educated, they found that ACEs were common. 2/3 of the original cohort had one. If you had one, you were 87% more likely to have two or more. So they found that they were common. They found that they were cumulative. And then most importantly, they found that there was a dose-response relationship between your ACE score and your likelihood of getting the very diseases that I had been treating in primary care for many years. So it increases your risk of diabetes, high blood pressure, any kind of cancer, stroke. In fact, 7 out of the leading 10 leading causes of death in the United States. But 10 categories doesn't begin to capture all the adversity that can happen to kids. And so in the ensuing years, since 98, the study has been replicated umpty-ump times. And what they found is that while ACEs continue to be common and cumulative and correlate with health outcomes, there are much wider range that we should be thinking about. So now the general feeling is that there are household ACEs. There are things that happen to kids individually. There are community ACEs, so that if you're growing up in a community that is poverty-ridden or faces a lot of systemic racism, or there's difficulty getting growing in jobs, anything like that, it counts as a community ACE. And then there are also, because of climate change, there are climate ACEs as well. ACEs that impact, that are caused through relationship, tend to have more of an impact than those that are called situational, that don't have like a name associated with them. And then I think it's also important to recognize that even if you have children that have no horrible things happen to them per se, you still can have experiences of trauma. And trauma is not so much what happened to you, it's what a kid experiences inside of themselves. So that's something that comes from researcher Gabor Mate, who's done a great deal of research and lecturing around this as well. And so my final piece of this is you can have children who are growing up in homes where there's there's wealth, there's food, there's security. But if their essential needs aren't being met, like if they don't feel seen or affirmed, or if they are struggling with things like food insecurity, housing insecurity, then that can be a kind of trauma too, even when none of the original traditional things that you think could happen.
Yeah, I think as we start to think about sort of the evolution of how we term these experiences, I think one of the best examples is COVID-19.
Yes.
You know, that it hasn't necessarily been typified right now as an ACE.
Oh, it's nice.
It is absolutely adversity that I think all of us have experienced.
Yes.
Not just children, but how does that impact children later in life? I think it's still probably too early to tell, but it's something that I think we need to be taking a closer look at
Yes.
some point in the future.
Yeah, I think in the trauma-informed communities, COVID has been embraced as an ACE, unfortunately, because kids have been so profoundly impacted. And you see that playing out, right? Like you see the recent study that showed how many girls are struggling with anxiety and suicidal ideation and bullying, and a lot of that has intensified throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to take a step back to something you said in your response to your first question and kind of tie that back into something from your bio. One of the things that I found very interesting is that we talk about sort of the medical outcomes from ACEs, the diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. But in your work, you actually found that ACEs also impacted wound generation and healing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, that was pretty fascinating when we put two and two together. And I have to give kudos to Dr. Bites at Rutgers University. But yes, it's when you first hear about adverse childhood experiences, a lot of times you think, oh, that's a mental health thing, or I should refer to social services kind of thing. But it feels like something that we should intellectually manage, right? But research has demonstrated conclusively that these early adversities in childhood profoundly impact brain development, the development of our immune and hormonal systems, and even our genetic expression. And so I think this is a great place to bring up the concept of toxic stress. So we all have stress responses, and stress is good. We need stress. Stress teaches things. It motivates us. It keeps us focused. We need stress. And when you have stress appropriately and you have the love and the support to manage the stress, then what happens is your stress level goes up and it comes back down, and you're actually more resilient for it. So stress is very important. Unfortunately, we have way too many children growing up in our society and globally who live in what's termed toxic stress. And that's stress that overwhelms the coping mechanisms, and it shifts our adjustment, our response to stress from adaptive, meaning we get back to what normal should be, to maladaptive, meaning that we live in this chronic elevated state of stress. And that ends up causing one way to think about it is molecular scarring. It embeds in our bodies. Nadine Burke-Harris, she's one of the trauma experts out there, and she was the first Surgeon General of California. She likes to say that it's this toxic stress that gets underneath your skin. And one of the things I love to say is that your lived experience becomes your biology. And so what ends up happening is that you have chronically high levels of stress hormones like cortisol. And so instead of having them go high in the morning and come down so you can go to sleep at night, they stay always kind of chronically elevated, but at a higher level than normal. So you can't wake up as well. You can't go to sleep as well. You can't really relax and let go at the end of the day. And that in turn causes chronic inflammation, not swelling that you would see like on your skin or on your ankles or anything, but on the inside. And that contributes very much to the heart disease, things like that. And then finally, genetically, we all have a genetic template that we all know comes from our parents, right? Half from one, half from the other. Yeah. And that's called your genetic template. But that actually only drives about 2% of genetic expression, like how your genes are going to play out. The remaining 98% of genetic expression is due to an interaction between the environment and your genetic template. That's called epigenetics. Okay. And we know now that childhood trauma puts markers on our genetic template, which shifts the way genes are expressed. It also can shorten the protective ends of the chromosomes, telomeres. And so all of that contributes. The inflammation, the genetic markers contribute to the 7 out of 10 leading causes of death in the United States, that we then see the strong correlation between ACEs and health outcomes. And I think it's also important to note that we can heal from this. That's so important to understand as well, because this can get really heavy and really depressing to hear about. But that's the cool thing, is that research is beginning to demonstrate that when trauma is transformed, understood, and we heal from it, then our genetic expression has the potential to change as well, and the inflammation can go down as well.
That's kind of a hopeful place to kind of land with this, because I do think it does get to a place of, you think about all of this adversity and trauma, and it does feel very heavy, especially for people, because I think a lot of our audience members are people that work in helping professions. They want to know about this.
Yes.
And they get mired in sort of that negative aspect of ACEs that I think they sometimes miss, that there's another side of the coin. And you and I have talked about this. And that's the addition of positive childhood experiences into the conversation and into the continuum. And I just wanted to find out from you, why is it important to incorporate that broader view of positive and adverse childhood experiences as part of like a larger continuum of experience? And what can positive childhood experiences really teach us about working with families and children who may come from a traumatized background?
Thank you for asking that question, because I think that the positive childhood experiences are going to prove to be as important, if not possibly more important, than recognizing adverse childhood experiences. So, and both are important, but it feels like the other half of the coin. So this is research coming from a number of different areas across the country, but I think the researcher leading this charge is Dr. Christina Bethel out of Johns Hopkins University. And papers only started to be published about positive childhood experiences in 2019. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon. But what it's demonstrating is that when children have positive childhood experiences, which really include things like you feel safe enough to express your emotions at home, you feel like you truly are safe and protected by someone at home, but that you also feel like you belong in the community, and that you feel like you belong at school, you have friends. It's really all about connection and safe relationships. When those are present, then children can thrive despite adversity. And I have seen this play out already multiple times in conversations with people. For instance, I was working at a conference a year ago, and someone I was working with acknowledged that she had a very high ACE score, and yet she had managed to become fairly successful in her life and enjoyed her life without ever directly addressing her ACEs. And when I talked about the positive childhood experiences, she said, "Oh, that's it. I had those in my life." And another leader in the trauma-informed field, Jane Stevens, she started the PACES Connection community. And she points out that you can have children that have a very low ACE score, but they also are lacking the PCEs, the positive childhood experiences, and they may be as much at risk for these health outcomes as kids who have, say, a higher ACE score, but also plenty of positive childhood experiences. And so it really is critically important to integrate the two as we move forward, both because it's really nice when you have ACEs to hear about pieces as well, right?
Yeah.
So it lightens the burden of learning about these things, but also I believe that positive childhood experiences point the way towards solutions that organizations can adopt to try to make more of a difference in children's lives.
In the prevention of child abuse and neglect, we often talk about these things called protective factors, and they're sort of assets that a family can have to really build up the prevention of child abuse and neglect. It's family strengthening, that kind of thing. Is this just another term? So protective factors, is that just another term for positive childhood experiences, or are we talking about something different?
That's another great question, and they are different. They're two different things.
Okay.
So protective factors kind of set the stage for the likelihood of children experiencing positive childhood experiences.
Okay.
But positive childhood experiences are embodied. You can have a child that has everything in place, but they don't feel heard. They don't feel safe in expressing their emotions. And maybe they don't feel deeply safe in their bones. So I would actually invite the audience to just close their eyes for a minute and notice what it feels like when you're with someone that you do feel deeply safe with, and notice how that feels in your body. We are a culture that likes to think of our brains, our head brains, as separate from our bodies. But the truth of the matter is that the majority of communication that goes from the body to the brain is upward, not downward. So our head brains are not the CEOs of our bodies. The communication really is coming from body to survival brain, and then it's our survival brain that decides if we should even think about it or not, or if we should just react. I share that because emotions are felt they're very deeply embodied. And we have the ability to create safe and stable, nurturing relationships. And again, the protective factors create the space for that. But whether a child's actually feeling it is something completely different. And that's what positive childhood experiences, it's pointing towards that embodied experience.
Sure. I think that gets to what we're talking about. When we talk about the protective factors, it's always a framework. It's a framework
Yes.
for relationship building.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, this is more internalized. This is, what the experiences of the individual are, as opposed to what the, external ability to have those experiences are.
Right. And going back to the research that Dr. Bites and I have done, we've demonstrated that when you have a lot of adversity, and I'm going to guess that those same people didn't maybe have as many positive childhood experiences, it actually contributes to irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease and even, painful menstruation and so many of these GI experiences, that gastrointestinal experiences that people are diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Who knew? And it's all, and I'm convinced it has to do with this embodied experience that our society likes to negate, right? We don't like to listen to our bodies. But it turns out the answer very much is learning to listen to our bodies.
Yeah. At the top of today's broadcast, I mentioned that the New Jersey Office of Resilience was formed in 2020 and is really, kind of focused on coordinating the response to ACEs statewide. What are some of the activities that the office is engaged in right now?
Yeah. When I came in, I'm building on the shoulders of the first director, David Ellis, and he, together with some external organizations, created a 5-point action plan. I feel like it's my responsibility to step in and to make that actionable.
Sure.
And so some of the things I really want to see happen is, because that research on positive childhood experiences has been so recent, most of the language that's been discussed in New Jersey to date has been about ACEs, and that's great. We need that. We need the science of that to understand that. But what I'd like to do is shift from ACEs to PACEs. So I've got my staff being trained in that, and having it be just roll off their tongues to talk about PACEs, and then we do have some great initiatives already going. We have a micro grant process. We in January awarded 23 microgrants to community organizations that normally it's difficult to get state funding to, but thankfully we have partners in 3 different regions in New Jersey. They're called regional ACEs collaboratives. And through them, we've been able to identify smaller organizations. And so there's amazing work that's beginning to happen through those, and we have a second round of those going currently as well. Another initiative that we're doing is my team has identified communities that are at risk, and they are promoting police youth initiatives that increase the likelihood of building a safe and stable relationship with a police person in the town. And so we are initially focusing on South Jersey. I'm a South Jersey girl, and so you could say that that's a bias, but actually the research, the statistics very much support focusing on South Jersey. You go below the line of Trenton, and all the statistics for health worsen, unfortunately. And so we are just rolling that out now, but it looks like we're going to have 7 or 8 police units that will be funded to have these police youth initiatives for the next year, and that's very exciting as well. Yeah. And then we're going about identifying all the amazing work that's already occurring in New Jersey around addressing ACEs. So there are some really impressive initiatives that are already in place, and increasingly I'm seeing. One of the roles of the Office of Resilience is to highlight those and to promote those, and hoping to have convenings of like-minded peoples, and very much seeking problems to solutions, solutions to problems, say that again, from the community, because the answers have got to come from people who are most impacted by ACEs.
I think that's super important in terms of how we engage our partners in this work.
Yes.
And I think when we created this template for the Office of Resilience, the idea was that it was going to be engaging some of our sister state agencies.
Yes.
To really develop sort of an all of government approach. And I'm going to start using the term PACEs, because I know that we want to start pivoting there. And catch me if I
No,
misspeak.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
But I think it's really important to have that all-of-government approach to PACEs. But you also mentioned a lot of work that's happening right now within the community.
Yes.
Engaging the microgrant recipients, engaging some of the work that's already in place, working with police units. Can you talk about why it's important to have them along for this work?
Oh, sure. I think for way too long, you've had people who live in safe situations. I think about social determinants of health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have people who are more privileged, who have more power, and they're looking at those people over there and they're otherizing them, right? And they're saying, oh, I know what you need. And then fill in the blank. And they come up. And then those, and actually sometimes a lot of money is invested into those solutions, right?
Yeah.
And then you bring them to the community and the community looks at you like, are you for real? Because it's not what was needed at all. And in fact, people who are living, especially people who are living in community ACEs, right? Whether it's a concentrated urban poverty or it's a rural poverty, and then I cannot underestimate the impact of structural racism, particularly in our state. People who are living with that and facing those barriers daily, they know what they need. And they know what the answers are. They just need to be put in places where they're empowered to share that, and also empowered through funding to execute the initiatives that they know that are needed.
Sure. Now, going back into, again, most of our audience, I assume, is going to be people that are working sort of in those social services fields. How can individuals that are working in those sort of helping professions, the social service professions, even folks that are working directly with DCF, how can they incorporate a PACES mindset into their work as they move forward?
So there is learning that needs to happen. One of the things I want to identify is, how does New Jersey identify that you are truly trauma informed? Kind of want to borrow from Missouri. Missouri has this Missouri model that has 4 steps. It's your trauma aware, your trauma sensitive, your trauma responsive, and then your trauma informed. And that cannot occur without a number of things happening. One is being familiar with the science behind it. So sometimes it's referred to as the NEAR science. It's neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, and resilience, the science of resilience. Within that, I think positive childhood experiences need to be added. So my feeling is there are at least 5 areas. But you have to understand that science, because it's really the why. It gets to the root of what you're witnessing. And then a paradigm shift needs to happen, right? You need to shift from, instead of asking what's wrong with you, it's asking what happened to you, because when you understand the trauma, then you understand the behavior. It's recognizing that every behavior is a message that's being sent. And when you understand the body-mind connection, you realize a lot of times that the behaviors are survival mode. And it's not someone choosing to be really annoying. It's because something happened to them, and the way their mind is perceiving it, it's triggering a certain response, right? Which increases empathy and compassion. But I think the last piece that's really, really important is to shift from an us-them mindset, which unfortunately I think too many people, including me in the past, who are in serving professions, it's like, yep, that's us, and these things happen to them. And so one of the things that, again, I'll go back to Jane Stevens, what she really promotes is that every single person in the serving field, in a serving profession, needs to ask themselves the ACEs questions and the positive childhood experiences questions, so that they see that this information applies just as much to them as it does to the people that they serve. And so we shift from an us-them mentality to a we-us mentality. And with that comes passion, a sense of purpose, as well as that increased empathy and compassion.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that kind of play out, at least in terms of, members of our workforce that may have some sort of lived experiences with our system. That same sort of like, it's not this family over there has this going on, but we can come in and fix it. It's how do we get to a solution working together and having empathy and having compassion. So I think that absolutely is playing out as we start to have conversations about how we incorporate more lived experience, authentic voice, shared leadership, all of that. So I think that really ties into a much larger conversation that I don't know that we have the full time to talk about today.
Yes.
Around our transformation.
Yeah.
But I do want to leave the audience with just one question about what's on the horizon for the Office of Resilience. I think you've kind of alluded to a lot of things that are happening right now, but what's next?
Right. I want to identify places in New Jersey where they are already doing a great job with this, and I want to partner with them. So one of the things is outreach, is just recognizing the fact that there is so much good work being done, and to celebrate that. I would like to reconvene a New Jersey ACEs task force that would bring people from across all different sectors. You had mentioned that we need to work with interagencies through interagency relationships. There are ways that different sectors contribute to the development of toxic stress that I think when you raise the awareness of it and you realize the biology behind it, that maybe it's going to make you think of other solutions, right? And then I am so excited about DCF because I want to work right alongside the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging to address structural racism. And there is nothing more important than staff health and wellness, because if we are not in a place of wellness ourselves, then when we are engaging with others, that message comes across, and we can't be fully present to the people that we serve. And then I want to work with the Office of Family Voice, right? Because we need community voices at the table so that they can let us know, oh no, you make that decision and it's going to cause X, Y, and Z, right? And then to create space so that families actually can do what they know how to do, which is to raise a child well. But they can't raise a child well when they have to work 2 and 3 jobs and have to commute for 2 hours and have to worry about whether when they come home that it'll be safe enough or that they'll have enough food to feed their children. So it's all tied together to me, and spreading that word and having those cross-sector conversations are what I'm really looking forward to.
Great. So thank you so much. Thank you for participating in today's conversation, and really for taking the time to talk to us about the important work that you're doing here in DCF. If you'd like to learn more about PACES, please visit the New Jersey Office of Resilience website, which is nj.gov/DCF/resilience.html. And I know that we're going to be having other conversations about how we upgrade that and really make that a resource for this community conversation to be able to engage everyone and bring everyone to the table. On behalf of my producers and the New Jersey Office of Communications and Public Affairs, this is Jason Bukowski signing off. Tune in next month for more DCF on the Air.